the dark, kindle the spark in me.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Flicker. We've been working our way for some time through the Sermon on the Mount, the teachings of Jesus we find in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and can you believe it, we're almost to the end. By the end of this week, we'll be all the way through this whole series, which means just another few episodes, and we'll have made it all the way through Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7. And to get into today's verses, what we're going to talk about, I'm reminded first of an old saying I heard long ago. Somebody once said, maybe you had somebody in your family who would say it this way too. They'd say, a cat may have her kittens in the oven, but that don't make them biscuits. And while I don't have a whole lot of experience with cats having kittens in the oven, I could at least imagine it. Sure, cat's going to go find some warm, quiet, secluded place to go have her kittens, but if it happens to be the oven, that doesn't make the kittens biscuits. Just because you find something in the oven doesn't mean it's a biscuit. And I suppose you could say too, just because you find me in a garage doesn't mean that I'm a mechanic. Just because you find something in a particular place doesn't make it what it looks like. And Jesus kind of has a similar sort of thing to say as we come toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has been often concerned about the difference, the disconnect between what we say and how we present ourselves on the one hand and who we are on the inside. We talked about that before just a little bit ago, and Jesus talks about the way we talk, the way we present ourselves and what our actions reveal about us. That the kind of tree we are is shown in the kind of fruit that we bear, and that there's an important connection between our actions and who we are deep down. Jesus also often has harsh words for the folks in his day, the usually respectable religious people whose job was to present themselves like being religious, to make it look like they were particularly pious, when deep down they were often just sort of play acting, pretending, and Jesus always calls to something deeper. So Jesus says these words that are important to hear, but I gotta be honest, are really easy to misuse, really easy to weaponize. So maybe let's tread with caution here, remembering that just because a cat has her kittens in the oven, it don't make them biscuits. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many deeds of power in your name?' Then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers.'" Alright, so that's a little bit scary, because, I mean, how frightening would it be to think that you have done and said all the right things, you've signed your name on the dotted line, you're a card-carrying member of the Jesus Club, only to find out your membership didn't really count. It's a scary thought, right? It suggests that it's possible for a person to be convinced that they are a follower of Jesus and for him to say, "Sorry, nope, you had it all wrong." And that's a scary thought. But I think maybe first we need to take a look at who Jesus might be aiming these words at. Because Jesus isn't one to punch down. Jesus isn't one to find people who are already troubled in their spirits and make them more afraid. But Jesus does have a way of yanking the rug out from folks who are pompous and full of themselves and are convinced they have all the answers. And maybe it's worth saying in a day like today that just because you put a cross on something doesn't make it Christian. Just because you slap a Bible verse on something doesn't mean that God endorses whatever product you have to say. We live in a time, especially in this age of commodification, when you can find quote-unquote Christian apparel all over the place, not just bumper stickers, but clothes and necklaces and all sorts of odds and ends. And just because you have those, just because you have religious logos on them, doesn't mean that really you get what Jesus is about. And Jesus isn't looking for fans. Jesus is looking for followers. That's a really important piece. There's a famous line of Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard said that Jesus Christ isn't looking for admirers, but for disciples. And I think that's the difference. See, sometimes I think we treat the imagery, the logo, the language, the jargon of Christianity, of church stuff, like it's a brand. And if I'm wearing it, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if anything actually sinks down deeper than the surface to who I am and what I do in the world. As long as I, talk the Christian talk, as long as I've got a cross necklace on, then I must be in the club. But that's still all club thinking. That's all club mentality. What stuff do I have to do? How do I have to look to make myself appear like I'm on Team Jesus, to make it appear like I've done the right religious thing, when Jesus, again, has never been interested in getting members for a club, but in making us into a certain kind of people who act a certain way, who live a certain way, who follow in his paths as well. So Jesus calls us beyond just sort of shallow exterior appearance stuff. Like, I can wear a sports jersey for my favorite team, but just because I'm wearing a jersey doesn't mean I'm on the team, right? Same thing with the Kittens and the Biscuits, right? Just because I've got the logo doesn't mean that actually the kind of person I am should be starting for a professional sports team. I just don't have it in me. And sometimes it is so easy for us to just sort of treat being a Christian like it's a matter of our outward appearance. If I talk in the right talk, if I use the right language, but it doesn't actually sink down to having the priorities that Jesus points us to. And from the beginning, Jesus has been trying to show us what kind of priorities matter if we're concerned about the will of God, about the reign of God, about the Yahweh administration. He goes all the way back to the opening words of the Sermon on the Mount, about God's priorities, or special blessing on the poor and the left behind, on the brokenhearted, on those who feel like they've been stepped on those who have been mistreated because they've been seeking justice and righteousness, the people who are willing to get into good trouble. That's sort of where Jesus sets out. These are God's values. You've seen along the way that Jesus sees that his way of life looks like returning kindness even when people have been rotten, being truth-telling even when it would be easy to be to go along with deceptions and lies, to be honest when it would be easier to cover things up, to be gracious when we are tempted to be bitter. That's sort of the way of life Jesus is charting out. And if you skip out on that, but just have the religious jargon, Jesus says that doesn't fool anybody. That's like pretending your kitten that got born in the oven is a biscuit. It's not. It's just not how it is. So I want to suggest today, instead of us having to stay up at night fearful, is Jesus going to surprise me one day when I get to glory and say, sorry, you didn't make it into the club? Let's quit worrying about the club mentality and instead ask the question, how can I be genuine? And be concerned with what matters to Jesus. Jesus is far less interested in us looking the part of Christians, but instead that we be people who live in light of God's priorities, who live loving neighbors, loving strangers, loving enemies, being people of integrity and decency. And that way, no matter how we're dressed, no matter if we have the right language or not, we'll be following after Jesus. Jesus, after all, didn't look very churchly either. Jesus never wore a cross necklace, and Jesus never darkened the door of a church building, and spent most of his time hanging out with people that might raise some eyebrows when they darken the doorstep of your church or mine. So maybe we can quit worrying about whether we look the part or sound like religious people, and instead just ask, where are our hearts aligned? And are we pointed in the same direction Jesus keeps leading us? When we get off track, and it's going to happen, don't worry about it. I've messed up so much I'm going to get kicked out of the club. Maybe instead we simply trust Jesus will keep leading us and pulling us back on track. That's what this is all about. And join us here for these remaining episodes of Flicker as we get close to the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks for joining us. Bye.